All right, welcome back to episode 5 of Science of the Strike. Corbin Healy here with Sam Huckabee. Today we are getting back into another sense. We last episode kind of deviated from our first 3 episodes just to change things up. First 3 episodes were very specific to like sensory mechanisms, sensory organs of bass. Episode 4 was on prey. Now we're back to talking about something that I think is super interesting, which is um, hearing
Yep.
and lateral line. Two things that, again, there is plethora of confusion out there. There's a bunch of marketing, a bunch of the lures that we buy and things that we do are loosely about sound or loosely about lateral line, but I never understood anything about it until now. And so we were talking a little bit beforehand. We try not to get into our respective topics too much before this, but we were speaking a little bit about how researching not only this topic but the other topics that we've talked about in episodes 1 through 4 have really informed the way that Sam and I have been fishing. We're out here at Truman right now. We've got a tournament in the morning, and we just were talking about how the things that we were catching fish on today were largely influenced by the science that we now understand through the research that we talked to you guys about. So,
Yeah, very much so. It's like your lens changes on how you look at different lures in your box when you go to
yep,
select certain things. Like you colors you see differently now. Like you know that when what bass see is different
yep,
than what humans see.
yep,
You know, the way that now that I know about sound and hearing, changes the way that I might look at certain rattles in a crankbait or something like along those
for
lines.
sure,
And with that helping us only can make us better. And
for
that's,
sure.
our goal is to bring that to you, to help everyone become a better angler, give you the most scientific research we can bring you. And that's what we're going to try to do today.
So I'm going to start off with lateral line, and then after that, Sam's going to do hearing. So just a very brief, generalized understanding of what a lateral line is. If you have ever fished for largemouth bass, you have seen it, probably without realizing that you have. Among uh, the arsenal of a bass's sensory mechanisms is this, it's a system really that we call a lateral line that is often described as their like sixth sense, or essentially touch at a distance. And this system is unique, I did not know this, to exclusively fish and aquatic amphibians. There are no other animals that have it. So
Okay.
and it provides them the ability to detect anywhere from very drastic to very subtle movements, vibrations, pressure gradients, or changes in their immediate vicinity. It's not necessarily a single organ like the eye or like the olfactory or
The
whatever it might
ear.
be.
Yeah.
It's a string of sensors that are distributed all the way from the bass's top of its head all the way down to its tail.
Okay.
And when I say that you've seen it, if you look at a largemouth bass, you'll notice it has that, the darker line that goes along its side. That's often just, its scale color or
Uh-huh.
just the natural color of the fish. Well, that line at its core is the display of that system.
Okay.
Um, so what's interesting to me that I did not know is, I've always heard lateral line, but I really didn't know what it meant, what goes into making up the lateral line. And that faint line that you see is actually a line of pores that are running longitudinally along each flank of the fish,
Huh.
extends head to tail, and these pores are openings that open up to what is called like an underlying subdermal canal, which forms a network essentially, that goes all the way from the cranial canals, which are in the head, to the trunk canals that are in the body and tail of the fish.
Oh
Okay,
wow.
so what happens is inside of these pores and inside of these canals, there are multiple different types of canals and pores that make up the lateral line, two primarily. I'm going to try to stay out of the weeds there because I don't think it is necessarily important. But what's interesting to understand is inside of these pores and inside of these canals, at a very microscopic level, are almost hair-like structures.
Mm.
Okay, I don't think that they're actually hairs like we have on us, but the way that the structure is, it acts as if it is a hair.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and so what happens is that as water flows or a pressure gradient changes or there's a shift in the water or anything like that, the bending of those very delicate, they're called cilia, or
Hmm.
embedded hair cells, is what triggers or informs the fish as to what is happening.
Okay.
Okay. So this bleeds into sound a little bit because there's a lot of studies that talk about the hertz levels at
Yeah.
which scientists suspect that bass might be feeling versus hearing
Okay.
something, and that to me is still a little murky. Maybe you can help clear that up.
Yeah.
My understanding is that the lateral line itself is a sensory organ that deals exclusively with feeling on the fish. It is
Right.
a close range sensory mechanism, which
Yes.
is what my studies have shown. So to be clear, the lateral line is not designed for a long range detection.
Hmm.
Instead, it excels at providing very detailed information about the hydrodynamics of what's happening around the fish's immediate vicinity. So, I want to talk a little bit about just how sensitive uh, this lateral line is. So bass possess a remarkable sensitivity to water motion via the lateral line, and studies have indicated the detection threshold as low as 0.03 millimeters per second for water currents, stimulating free neuromasts and the ability to detect surface wave displacements of just 0.01. uh, I don't know what unit they use here. I'm assuming it's millimeters per second, in specialized surface feeding fish. So
Wow.
this high sensitivity allows bass to perceive minute vibrations generated by hidden prey, approaching predators, or even inanimate objects interacting with the water. So all this to say
That's
is that these
crazy.
cilia inside of these pores and canals are incredibly sensitive, incredibly sensitive.
Yeah.
Now, there's studies that talk about how fish and bass, you know, can block out in a way the kind of background noise that might be current or
Uh-huh.
that might be um,
They're used to it.
they're used to
They
it,
become
right?
accustomed to their environment.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um, Now, so this is also super interesting to me about what they're able to detect. Well, let's bring this back to a little bit more basic and why this matters a little bit. And so the reason that this sensitivity of this matters so much is it tells me, and the science that I read supports that bass can detect, excluding vision, excluding scent, and excluding hearing,
Yeah.
can detect, completely blind otherwise, very, very, very subtle movements, and can tell the difference between those subtle movements that are right on top of them. So, for example, one thing that I've seen a lot of in my years of bass fishing, a great group of guys who talk about this a lot is Tactical Bassin. I've learned a lot from Tactical Bassin on their YouTube channel, and they talk a lot about the difference in like a jig trailer. Okay, your colder months, you're going to want like more of like a flatter, like chunk
Sure.
style trailer,
Yeah.
whereas in the warmer months you're going to want something that kicks. And they always talk about how, oh well, the vibration, that's different, or maybe it's more real to what the fish are
Slower
seeing. The
movement. Yeah.
pros are widely vary on this. There's a group of pros that say the chunk you need to be throwing exclusively, that's all you need to be throwing. You have other guys who say that you have to have the flutter tail. What the science tells me is that there is a difference. There is a significant difference,
Yeah, for sure.
which is wild. And I want to read a line here from one of these studies. It says, furthermore, bass may be able to detect and follow the lingering hydrodynamic trails, the swirling vortexes left in the water created by fish that have recently passed.
Wow.
These, quote, fish footprints can persist for minutes in calm water and potentially provide information about the prey's trajectory, species, size, and even its physical condition, like injured or weak. This
Injured
capacity,
or weak?
yeah.
That's incredible.
Well, I mean, think about like if you've seen with your eyes in clear
Uh-huh.
water or on forward-facing sonar, a fish track a bait.
Yeah. Yeah.
That goes into that. The lateral line
Yeah.
goes into them tracking a bait, with that vortex. And imagine the difference in vortex between like a chatterbait or a spinnerbait versus like a lipless,
Yeah,
right?
chatterbait. Like that's
So much
so
displacement,
much,
right?
yeah. And
It goes on.
noise and
It says this
vibration and
capacity for detailed signal analysis implies that the lateral line provides far more than just a simple on and off signal indicating presence. The bass is likely interpreting the quality and pattern of the hydrodynamic disturbance.
so it's really how good you can shake it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so.
I mean, who's got
I
that
mean, hey, yeah,
right? Who knows what they're doing the
yeah.
best? It's always that question.
It can associate specific vibration signatures with known prey types and differentiate these from irrelevant background noise or novel stimuli. This analytical power is fundamental to its predatory success and has a direct implication for angling. The specific vibration pattern generated by a lure is likely a key factor in whether a bass perceives it as a potential meal, an unknown object, or a threat. Subtle differences in lure action, retrieve speed, or trailer design can translate into significantly different hydrodynamic signatures perceived by the bass's lateral line.
Very interesting.
So interesting to me. Like, I mean, because like what that tells me is like, okay, say you're fishing a jig
Mm-hmm.
and you are not having luck on a jig, or maybe you're getting a bite here and there. I mean, how easy is it to say, well, they're not
Jig's
biting
not
the
working.
jig's not working. I'm putting
Right.
the jig down, or I'm not getting enough bites on that. Instead, say, well, I've gotten one bite on the jig, or I've gotten two bites on the jig. It's slow. Instead of putting it down, I'm going to completely change this trailer. I'm going to go to something that is putting off way more action or way less action, because it does make a big difference.
Right.
I mean, that's wild to me.
Huh.
Um,
Good information.
there was a couple more things I wanted to talk about with this. So I guess one thing that I always want to focus on when we're doing these is, how does this apply to anglers? How does this apply to anybody else out doing this, right?
Yeah.
When you're out on the water, if, if you're thinking, another way to think is like think hydrodynamically, okay? Recognize that every lure moving through the water creates a unique signature of vibrations and water displacements that are detectable by the fish.
Yeah.
And that signature is important, and sometimes might be more important than the visual appearance. I read some stuff that talked about
Especially in dirty water.
that, and that's what I read is, in dirty water, when you have these fish that can't see as well, that obviously the lateral line becomes way more important. And when we did our vision episode, which I believe
Yeah.
was episode 1, we alluded to the lateral line, but at that point we didn't know the implications or how it worked.
Exactly.
We just would people lean back and say, well, it's dirty water, they're using their lateral line. Well, now we know how they're using it, right?
Right.
Which I think is so important to understanding, just knowing why you're doing what you're doing. The
Right.
other thing is, like experimenting with lures that produce different types and intensities of vibrations. Looking at blade shape, lip design of a crankbait, the profile of a crankbait or a body, the retrieve speed. One thing and I'm sure you'll
Yeah.
talk about this with crankbaits, that I didn't think about this until we were researching. When you're retrieving a crankbait that has rattles in it, the
Yeah.
speed with which you retrieve it is going to change that
How much it's
sound and that
rattling.
frequency.
Right.
So
Right.
just something to think about as well.
Yeah.
I think Sam's going to do something similar. I've got a list of works cited here of where we got this information. If you're listening and you want to know the links to the scientific studies that we read to support this, let us know. The last thing, there were well, one random thing that has really no bearing on lateral line, but it's just so interesting that I have to tell you. In reading one of these studies, this study was called the lateralized behavior in the attacks of largemouth bass on gobies corresponding to their morphological anti-symmetry from a guy named Masaki Usugi and Micho Hori out of Japan in uh,
It's good stuff. It's coming out of Japan.
exactly right.
That's where everything's
2012.
invented.
Animals, including largemouth bass, do not behave left and right symmetrically. Some vertebrates are known to show biases to their turning decisions and limb usage, predator escape responses, and use of sensory organisms. Long story short, depending
The
on the
side your
bass,
lure's coming on.
well, not necessarily, but like a fish, if it detects it with its lateral line on one side, might stage up to attack a lure or a bait differently. Like we've seen underwater footage of bass attacking like crawfish or jigs or worms or whatever, just underwater footage. And they always nose up on them differently. Every fish might circle back on it. This research suggests that bass can tend to favor a certain side. I don't think that has any implications to how we fish,
It's
but
all because they're lateral line, though,
I'm
or
sure it is
because
because
their
of their
side.
lateral
It's
line.
all their
Or
senses combined,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
the lateral line plays into that.
Kind of interesting. So
Yeah,
that's what I've got
very
on
cool.
lateral line for the most part. I'm going to pass it over to you, and if I want to jump in at a certain point to talk
Yeah.
a little bit about sonar
Okay.
in terms of sound or feeling. So
Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to talk a little bit about sound and hearing, and I think this is super important for angling. This is kind of have changed how I look at certain baits like crankbaits and lipless and jerk baits and things of that nature that make a lot of sound in the water that can really make a difference. Or tungsten or
uh
lead,
huh,
things
uh huh,
along that. Like you're making decisions every day on what you're going to throw and what you're going to put in the water, especially when you're tournament fishing, doing those types of things where money's on the line, right? All of these decisions come down, to like why are you doing it, and that's what we're trying to present to you today. So with my sound and hearing, we're going to talk a little bit about some physiological mechanisms. What is the ear made up? How are they able to hear? We're going to talk about their sensitivity to hearing. What are they best at hearing? What kind of like range? What
mm-hmm.
certain things they hear best, and then how they respond to certain sounds, whether that be like in their ecological environment, or whether that be like human interaction and things along that nature. So to start, I want to say this. Sound in the water is much different than sound in the air, like we're
Oh,
speaking right
oh
now.
yeah. You
Okay,
ever gone swimming in a pool?
if you've ever been underwater and like in a lake or something and you hear a motor start up or you hear a motor running across the lake, you're
Yeah,
like, that's a big motor and I can hear that. And I'm just
yeah.
underwater, right? So sound travels 5 times faster and much further in water than air.
It's because water is significantly more dense.
Dense. It's
Yeah,
all about the
right, right,
density
right,
in that sense.
right.
Okay. So sound is a super reliable source of information for bass,
Oh, I'm sure they
especially
hear.
for attacking prey.
I'm sure they hear
Okay.
so much.
So the bass's auditory system, their ears, are dual receptor mechanisms involving the inner ear and the lateral line system. Okay.
Okay, so they work in
So
conjunction.
they work in conjunction big time. But the difference is the largemouth bass only have inner ears, where humans have inner, middle, and outer ears. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
This is the outer ear that you see. Obviously, your inner ears, your middle ears, your canal, and your inner ears, your the thing that sends the sound to
Right.
your brain and everything like that. So the inner ears all largemouth have, and that is because they are in such a dense water compared to us. They don't need all this extra cartilage out here to funnel the
Sure.
sound to their ear.
Sure.
Okay, so what is it in their ear that translates that sound? They're called oceliths or ear stones, and these oceliths are super dense.
Okay.
And with them being super dense allows them to be able to understand or receive that sound much greater than any other part of their body. These ocelets are the most dense thing in their body.
Really?
Yeah, more than their bones or anything of that nature. So
Wow.
this one ear stone is the most dense bone, so likely one of the most sensitive,
in their body.
pieces of, their what they're made of. Okay, so and those oscillants vibrate at a different rate than anything else in their body to help them translate that
Sure.
sound. Okay,
Sure.
so with that being said, ears are uber sensitive in a fish, in a largemouth bass. Okay, so what they do is they convert this mechanical energy of vibrations into neural signals that's translated to the brain, allowing bass to perceive sound. So that's
Hmm.
kind of how the physiological mechanisms work. Okay, it's all about the water density, how it's funneled to their ears, and then they can, translate that into the brain
Sure.
to whatever sound that is. Okay. Um, I will say that it is very much in conjunction how lateral lines and inner ears work.
I'm
So
sure.
that keep that in mind. The sensitivity of that lateral line also, sends the information to the brain and the ear, and those work together to understand the sound and how it feels for them to think
Sure.
prey or predator type of
Yeah, it
thing
just
coming
gives them
towards
the
them.
more full
Right,
picture of
right.
what's going on and what they're
Right.
going after.
So, what I have found, and this is from two very respected scientists, doctors of science in the industry of bass fishing and just bass in general, bass studies, is Dr. Don McCoy from the University of Kentucky and Dr. Keith Jones, who wrote Knowing Bass, which is a
Yeah.
super famous research
Keith
article.
Jones, did we do
We talked a little bit about him
with
in this.
scent?
Yeah, yeah. I think
I
it
think he
was
works for
2 or 3
Berkeley or
ago. Yeah, yeah. I think you're right.
was associated with Berkeley's labs,
Yes.
with Berkeley's fishing labs, not Berkeley, California.
Right. So they have both come to the recognition of, or like what they have found is that bass can hear in a range of 10 to 600 hertz. Okay.
600 is way higher than what I saw. Wow.
So yeah, so both of them have said 600. Now, peak sensitivity is 100 hertz.
That's what I've seen,
Okay,
like
and
80 to
that
100.
that is the most important thing for you to get from this. Okay, the 600 hertz and around that range is very limited hearing, but they believe there's still a possibility that they can hear those types of sounds.
Sure.
Okay, so with that being said, I'm gonna play a 100 hertz sound for you into the mic right here. Hopefully, you can hear this and get a sense of what 100 hertz actually sounds like. Okay, I don't know if you can hear this with my voice over
Super
it,
low.
but it's like a really, really, really low hum. Okay, it's not a high pitched by any means. Super, super low
Like a
pitched,
bass, like a like
super low bass,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, what that makes me think of when I hear that, and I first heard that, I'm like, so why do all of these crankbaits or these jerk baits or lipless
Tiny
crankbaits
little
have
BB.
these little BBs that sound like they're ticking like the highest pitch, like
Yeah,
screeching in there?
yeah.
That's not under 100 hertz. Okay, so like you can pull it up, you can pull up a range of hertz, whatever you want to listen to. But if you listen to that 100 hertz range, it's super low, dense sound. So when I think of that in like a crankbait or something, like how can I
Yep.
apply that? Is like the hard knock or the one
The
knockers
two
or
taps.
two
Yeah,
taps that are super like knock, 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 knock.
yeah.
Like when you're shaking those baits up, like, so that's something I think of when I pull a bait out of a box. I'm going to grab it, I'm going to shake it. Okay. I think that sounds dense,
Yeah.
deep,
The tungsten,
right?
like
The
a red eye
tungsten,
shad, like those one knockers are just like,
right,
they're
right.
so deep.
And that's why that's important, because once that hertz range gets over 600 or gets too high
They
pitched,
can't even hear
it
it.
doesn't matter as
It's like a
much.
dog whistle, probably.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah,
No, you
they
just
can
can't
only
hear it.
hear certain ranges. Humans can hear 20 to 20,000 hertz.
Okay.
So
Okay.
to give you an example, like that's again, they're selling the fisherman, right?
For sure.
Because it makes a
Oh, look at
different
all these
sound.
rattles, and it sounds really good to
Right,
you, but
right,
they can't.
exactly. It's all about getting the fishermen to just buy their bait in the end, right? It's all about the
Oh,
money. Everything comes
interesting.
back to the money in the end,
It
right?
always does.
So keep that in mind. Their hearing range is limited and is best at lower, density
Uh
sounds.
huh.
Okay, so keep that in mind when you're doing that kind of thing. Um, let's see here. So they did a few different tests and different research studies where they looked at certain acoustic ranges, and a lot of these were in the kilohertz ranges that they studied these fish in, and they found that a lot of these, sounds they're trying to make to try to make these like fish like react and things,
I think I read the same article.
didn't work as well as they thought, to
Yes.
some extent. I think that's part of it because of the kilohertz range they're ranging in, which is thousands of hertz.
Yeah, just for
You
the
know,
listeners, you have hertz. That is what 80 to 100 is what bass are primarily sensitive to.
right.
A kilohertz is going to be 1 kilohertz is 1,000 hertz. Just make
Right.
that
So
clear.
these are
So
thousands of hertz
way
that they're
higher
testing these at,
than
right?
what?
And
Yeah.
they tried to look at, swallowing mechanisms and chewing mechanisms and all of these
Uh-huh.
things of fish, like the sounds that they make to see if they can like make other fish react in the same
Sure.
way. But they did not do this very well, and they were testing at such a high range. I don't think that some of these studies had really good information for us to look at.
Uh-huh.
But they said sometimes that those swallowing and chewing can correlate to the density of fish in an area, any one time. But that's like fish schooling on bait or something,
Right.
right? That
Right.
they're probably,
Right.
relating this to, like one fish starts to react and the other fish can do something similar,
Right.
right? So, um, I did find this interesting. In one of my studies, it talked about, how low frequency vibrations generated by these lures can be detected by both the inner ear and lateral line, attracting these fish to a certain vicinity of a lure. However, certain largemouth bass that they have studied can become conditioned to certain lure sounds.
Yes.
So I think that is also important, for like innovation in the industry. Like when something new comes out and a new like sound, like I know it's like hard to get a different sound, but just like hertz are so minute, like in sound differences.
Sure.
Like you could like pick up, a Strike King, and then you could pick up a Berkeley, and like they could sound similar, but it'll be a little
It
different
will
at
be
the same
different.
time.
And that's just what the same is true with like the lateral line. Like
Right.
a rage craw versus, any other type of craw, like, might still kick, but in the end, like the range in which they're kicking actually will matter, which is, I know
Right.
that in a way complicates the selection process when you're out on the water, and it just adds another thing to think to, but it understanding how these fish behave will just give us a better picture overall as to how to be better anglers.
Right.
So
Yeah, and I think this also plays into something like a Rapala DT10 or DT6 that has no rattles, that's straight balsa.
yeah.
Like the fish don't get used to that because the way that it's bouncing off the bottom
Yep.
is different every time because it's depending on the structure that's running over.
That's a great point.
Right? But something like a Strike King 1.5 hard knocker, they're gonna have heard that sound before.
Yeah.
In a lot of your lakes.
Yeah.
Because that's common. Now it's not saying that's not going to catch fish. I might have one tied on tomorrow because they work.
Yeah.
And that is a deep rattle.
Yep.
But that is to say, like, if with conditioning being part of the problem with today's Asian bass fishing, with the how much it's happening nowadays, that can make a difference.
It can, yeah. And you better believe that we just tied up before we recorded this, and we've each got, I think between the two of us, we have like 5 or 6 crankbaits tied on. You better believe that before we tied them all on, we held the hooks and we heard those knocks, and we were looking for those deeper knocks in our boxes. And
Right.
So,
Right. Very much so. Last few things, and I think this is super, super important to fishing, is that largemouth bass can become attuned to sounds that indicate presence of predators. And what are those predators? A lot of times in the waters, that's us. That's anthropogenic noises. That's human noises that we cause in the water. Here's an example. Studies have shown that the exposure of boat motor noise, which is obviously the loudest noise we're going to make on the water,
yep.
Is a common source of underwater noise pollution in the freshwater environments, can lead to a significant increase in heart rate and cardiac output in largemouth bass.
Wow.
For 40 minutes.
Wow.
40 minutes. So starting up that motor around where you've caught fish and where you may plan to come back later in that day
could
affect the fish for 40 minutes.
You always hear that I've always heard, like, you got to let them rest.
Right.
I never, I always thought that, like, well, we've caught them or whatever, or we got to let them. Like, no, that means like you literally have to let their heart rates.
Right.
Wow, that's
Right.
so interesting.
I found that super cool, and it's elevated cortisol levels.
Yeah,
Cortisol levels
stress.
or stress
Yeah.
hormones for us and fish, right? That observed that they go like significantly through the roof when boat traffic or
Wow.
noise generated by like anglers like slamming latches on boats, or just running into trees, or all these different
Uh-huh.
things that
Uh-huh.
happen when you're trolling around, especially on Truman, all these just
Yeah.
timber filled lakes,
Yeah.
that cause different vibrations in the water or your trolling motor. That's why like the Force and the Ultrex pride themselves, and Minn Kota pride themselves on
Yeah,
quietness.
brushless. Yeah,
You
real
know,
quiet.
so
Yep.
that's why that's so important. So it says that research has also highlighted negative impacts of acoustic environments within aquaculture settings on the physiological well-being of largemouth bass, affecting crucial aspects of their immunological responses, so their ability to fight off infections, antioxidants capabilities, and digestive enzyme activity. So they're what are digestive enzymes? They're what help them digest their food. So if those are not working well, they're not going to want to eat,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So that in itself is turning them off from feeding.
I mean, you I think to guys who are super dedicated to trophy fishing. Your
Right.
guys like Mike Gilbert, your Butch Browns, your Oliver Nyes, those guys, you listen to them on YouTube
Right.
and you listen to these guys talk about how particular they get with their motors, how particular they get with their trolling motors and all that stuff in sonar, and we'll talk about sonar. And you listen to it and you're like, these guys give way too much credit to the fish, but they're not. And there's a
Yeah.
reason that those guys are the
Catch
top of
the
their
big
game
ones.
for catching 17 pounders.
Right.
They understand that these super small, the sounds of their motors, the sounds of their trolling motors. I mean, Mike Gilbert will pull up on a spot and will troll in for miles into a spot and then will sit and let it rest. And then he'll get up and make his one cast on a spot.
Yeah.
And well,
Yeah.
he's got how many teeners?
Right. And that this shows you
Supports
that
that.
that is
Supports that.
important.
Power to him.
And like, how many times are you scanning for a tournament? You scan, you find a group of fish, and you pull up on that fish. You can catch a couple, but like not catch what like the 50
Yeah,
bass that you see on the thing,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
they're scattered. You're messing them up, right?
yeah,
And the next day you come back and you turn it off early. You troll in there, right? Because you don't want to rescan over them,
yeah,
and you catch them. You actually like you really
yeah.
catch them, right? Like there's differences, in that
So
situation
interesting.
to where you like keep the motor off of them,
Yeah,
as much as you can,
yeah.
to make a difference.
Well, what's important to me is like, especially when it comes to our episode on sight,
Yeah.
fish are 100% capable of forming correlative memories.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
It's not even close. It's
Yeah.
undisputed.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that they hear a motor. Motor means danger. Like that.
Right.
That 100% they
Right.
can form that correlation.
Right. No, right. Yeah, exactly. And I found this interesting too, is that boat noise in particular has been shown to disrupt parental care behaviors of nesting largemouth bass,
Oh,
especially during critical egg sac fry stage development. So everyone want to get out and fish during the spawn. Fish are getting shallow, easier fishing. You don't have to go find them out deep, type of thing. All this boat motor noise can cause us to have a less good spawn
wow.
in a way, because if you're getting close to
Stress.
them and stress, and they're
Wow.
just, I mean, if you've ever seen them, they'll just fly off their bed if you get
For
close to them
oh, for
sometimes,
sure. For
and
sure.
that's what that's doing.
Wow.
That's the difference. So, I think this is a lot of important information for us to try to digest, for us to try to take into everyday
Oh,
angling.
for sure.
So I just think that I had no idea the impacts of,
Oh, yeah.
sound, like to the minute details that we have kind of figured out about,
Oh, for
the
sure.
rattle, and,
For sure.
how it's touching the bottom, and,
Yeah. Yeah.
all
Yeah.
these different things. So go ahead and pass it over to you.
Yeah. The last thing that I want to touch on is, with sound and that also kind of combines with lateral line. I think a really common and something that's important to talk about very briefly is sonar. You're always worrying about sonar chirp and clicks, and you hear pros talk about pulling up on forward-facing sonar, and oh, the fish felt that. Fish feels that sonar and in the lateral line, or they hear that sonar and they're moving away. And I wanted to look into a little bit as to whether or not that was true or not. There was a study by a guy named Arthur Popper from the Environmental Bioacoustics. He has a company, the Environmental Bioacoustics LLC in Rockville, Maryland,
Huh.
published a study in 2008 that is called The Effects of Mid and High Frequency Sonars on Fish. All right, so he talked a little bit about lateral line, that just re-supported about how it's, this specialized system, and that it's most sensitive to stimuli that occurs within a few body lengths of the fish, and that uh, it's sensitive to signals that are from 1 hertz or below 1 hertz to a few hundred hertz
Yeah.
at maximum. So they conducted a study, an experiment with sonar and these fish. And in this study, or in this example, fish were placed in bags 3 meters from the sonar source. So
Right in
right
the
on top of
face.
it, like 6 feet
Right.
essentially. And exposed to between 4 and 100 pulses of 1 second duration of pure tones at 1.5, 4, and 6.5 kilohertz.
Okay.
Okay, so that's not 80 to 100 hertz. These are kilohertz. All right,
Yeah.
so significantly greater. Sound levels at the location of the fish ranged from 150 to 189 decibels. There were no effects on fish behavior during or after exposure to sound, and there were no effects on behavior or growth on the fish or survival of the fish kept as long as 34 days post exposure. For some context, in terms of one of the most popular forward-facing sonar units on the market right now, which is the Garmin LVS 34 Panoptics. Those are shooting their
It's
frequencies of
live scope.
sonar. That's live scope, is shooting between 530 to 1100 kilohertz.
Yeah.
So that's equal to a range of 530,000 to 1.1 million hertz.
Yeah.
So long story short,
It's way above their hearing.
they're not hearing it, nor are they feeling it.
Right.
What they're more likely feeling
Is the
or
boat.
hearing is the boat motor,
Or
you
seeing
slamming
the shadow.
stepping down on the boat, or
Right.
you bumping into the side of it, or dropping a hatch in your or
Yeah.
latch in your thing. That's what they're hearing, or the trolling motor. They're not hearing your chirp.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that kind of rings true. Like you can scan fish, and come back and find them. If they were worried about feeling, those scanning mechanisms, like they would go if they knew that was a problem, right?
yep,
You could side scan, turn around, look at them, and catch them. That just goes to show, likely that these hertz are not affecting them as much as people may say.
yep,
Turn off your sonars all the time, in a really tough tournament.
yep.
We don't necessarily agree with that. Science doesn't back that by any means yet, or have they found to back that?
Yep.
So it's kind of where we're at.
So that kind of wraps up on the topics of lateral line and sound. Before I close up, I want to mention a couple groups who are kind of our current sponsors for Sign to the Strike. The first is a company that's called Fishers of Men Lure Company. It's a company that was recently founded by one of our buddies. His name is Cade. Super awesome guy. He started this Christian-based, faith-based company where he custom paints hard baits. So your crankbaits, top waters, big glide baits. We've been using them. Jerk baits. I've got 2 of them tied on for tomorrow. They've got that deep knock that we were looking for.
Yeah.
Caught fish on them today. If you want a custom job, high quality,
paints are good.
The paints are really, really good looking.
Yeah.
And also the baits that he's using to paint with are really nice. The glide bait, he has these 2 glide baits that are awesome. If you're looking to support a local guy and for a good cause, go check out Fishers of Men Lure Company. Cade is a really great guy. Another company that just sponsored me and my buddy Bo, who I fish club tournaments with is Hag's Bait Company. They make really great soft plastic jigs. They've got a really great chatterbait. They even have two really budget friendly rods. I haven't had the chance to fish with one of those rods, but they're Cyclone, or I believe it's their Cyclone or Twister worm, as well as their cheat code, go straight to the heart of what we were talking about tonight in terms of having multiple rage style appendages. Great baits. Go check them out. And finally, I just want to plug my buddy Bo. Bo just started his own little brand called B3 Custom Rods. He's totally gone on the deep dive on making custom rods, completely specced out 100% to what you want. He's got all the way to the custom thread color, to where you're putting the line tie, to the rod type, the action, the guides, the grips, everything. He's
Yeah.
building me one. He's building Sam one.
Yeah.
I've fished with his rods before. Incredible. If you're interested in getting into B3 rods, reach out to Samurai. You can just reach out to us on social media, or just leave a comment on Spotify
Yep.
or Apple Music where the podcast is at. So thanks so much for listening, guys, and we'll catch you next time on episode 6.